to the point where, kind of like my previous demo, the calculator is up and running now under motor control, and I can probably just demo some simple controls with just now it being run by a stepper motor rather than my hand cranking it. So I guess what I'll do is I'll add some numbers, and I think that's lower speed than normally is. I could speed it up more than that, but let's see. I've set that to repeat, so I've set that now to not repeat for addition. So the R repeat button is off, and it should clear that entry each time, and it did. Okay, so that's pretty good. And let's see here, can you guys see those numbers pretty well without? Never, it's always the thing about this stuff. You never get quite enough light. It looks like those other dials are kind of poorly illuminated here. See if I can get this a little better here. Not really happy with that. I don't know what to do on lighting. I'm going to have to get better on this whole camera photography stuff. Just seems like those guys aren't well illuminated. Now they're illuminated, but they're kind of glared out. I think that's probably as good as I'm going to get. Okay, right about there. So we can clear the upper dial or lower dial, upper dial. I can add numbers just fine. I can add more numbers, and I can subtract numbers, and then I can clear everybody just fine, and I'll set it to repeat, and I'll do some multiplication here. Put that on register, and then I'm going to I guess I'll multiply this number by I don't know, a few numbers here. I'll go 5, okay, and then I'll move the carriage over one, and I'll go 2, and I'm going to assume that number is correct. So far it looks like it's actually doing a pretty good job here. Get these guys out of the way so we don't know where numbers are here. Still got to get this case screwed down and cleaned a little nicer and see if clear works. So it looks like I'm up to the functionality I had my previous demo of the calculator with just hand cranking. I was showing multiplication, and just its general functionality is kind of restored. Now the next thing I'd like to show is I'll just get the control box out of the way, because he's really not the star of the show, is he? By the way, I hope to get this control box, all the components listed on Thingiverse. I've got to get the cover on it and so forth, but so that other people want to print this case and fold the sheet metal and so forth, those files will hopefully be on sometime in the near future. We'll kind of keep up with the this channel. Maybe I'll eventually get those out. So the next thing is I'll still be able to see the display. I think you can see it pretty good. The next thing I've been trying to get to work is this divide tab, and I think I probably babbled on earlier that the spring tension on this spring that I had troubles with early on, that I had to mess with, I think might be causing me trouble. But this control pin lever here that works on that arm that has those 3 notches I showed earlier, this spring force isn't quite enough to put it in there all the way when I hit the tab. Otherwise the divide tab seems to work. What I have to do is I have to give it a little help, and then it moves over, and it'll probably bump into my control box. Ooh, just misses it. Okay, and it works very nicely. Okay, so let's get that out of the way here. Professional lighting. It's people spend big bucks for people who know professional lighting, right? Okay, so I think those numbers are somewhat displayable. So my biggest thing is I got to figure that out. That's kind of my next thing here. Otherwise, I can now, let's see here, not quite there. Something else is on. There we go. Okay, so it didn't quite return the other direction, and I don't know if that's because I don't have enough spring force or too little spring force, but that's kind of the next thing to figure out. Otherwise, it works pretty nice. So there it is under stepper control. I think I'm lower speed than I normally am. I guess I'll max it out for the moment and just see what I can get here. So that's the fastest the stepper can go, which is about 245 RPM. If I go any higher than that, it'll start to lose steps. You'll overdrive the stepper faster than it can physically move, and it'll stall out on you, basically. So that all looks pretty good there. So I guess I'll go over and I'll hit repeat, and I'll do I'll multiply something here, I guess. And I'll just keep adding stuff. It's one of those things you have to kind of know what you're doing here. After a while, you get kind of confused. These calculators, you really do have to kind of pay attention to what you're doing, especially with the semi-automatic. So it all seems to work. I'll hit clear, and I think I'm not overdriving it. I think that's still a lower speed, and that's the fastest that my stepper motor can go. I was kind of hoping to be able to go a little faster than that, but that looks like that's my max RPM, which at least I know for sure is probably 245 RPM at the motor. What it really is at the output of the planetary, I'm still a bit uncertain on this. It looks like I'm still probably lower than what I think this thing is. In other words, I don't think I'm over speeding this guy. At least doesn't seem to be unhappy with it anyways. So the next thing to thrash out is the divide tab, and probably won't get it done today, but you can kind of see that it works up to a point, and then it finishes, and I think we're done. Yeah, okay. That time it actually cleared. I had to bump it a little earlier. So there we go. So if we hit divide tab again, once again I have to give it a little help here with my thumb, and then it gets going. Then from there I think it might clear. Oh, it didn't clear. Okay, it stalled out my stepper motor for just a moment there, and that's because I'm running the stepper at its highest speed possible, and stepper motors lose strength with speed. So I think I'll just dial it down. I'm just going to live with probably a little bit lower speed. I kind of figured this stepper motor would be more than powerful enough. The other thing I can do is I can adjust this potentiometer. Actually I guess it's just a variable resistor. It isn't a potentiometer. Well, whatever. Right now I got it set for maximum force counterclockwise, and it's going through then a resistor in series to a current measuring pin, and you got a table of various resistors that you can set it to for various currents that the motor would then be safely limited to, so you don't burn up your motor and so forth. And I can tweak that a little bit higher. I think I can get about probably another quarter of an amp for right now. I'm limited to about I think it's 1.4 amps, and I think this motor's rated for 1.8. So at maximum setting, I'm still not to the maximum motor power. So I might tweak that up a little bit more if I want to go to that little bit higher speed. If I'm happier with like 200 RPM, which is what it's at now, the motor seems to have plenty of power. So anyhow, so I got the divide tab over there, and I can now move the guy back over again. And maybe didn't quite go all the way there. Okay. Still sometimes isn't perfect, but it's getting better. And once again I have to give that guy a little bit of help. It wasn't quite it. Alright, well, things aren't perfect. Okay. There we go. I'm not sure what happened there. It could be, once again, I have a spring that needs to be adjusted. Getting closer though. There we go. It's just amazing the amount of mechanical logic going on here. So, anyways, I guess that's it. I'll have to struggle on the spring force, what it is that this guy needs to move without my having to give it a slight little nudge. Okay, so divide tab. When I tried to operate divide tab, I could push the button down. It would do most of its functions up to the point where it was actually going to move the carriage, and then on the side where the clutch arm is that engages the planetary, the machine would successfully pull the buttons down per se, but it wouldn't quite move them enough to get this trip arm to quite go over this indent here and actually get the clutch arm to actually engage the planetary gear. So what I found is that if you adjust, there's two little screws here on this little plate that kind of biases the position of the output of this shaft that goes up ultimately those key buttons, those addition to subtraction buttons, and that biases this arm that then goes kind of through this arm that goes through the side plate. You're looking at the inside of the machine underneath the keyboard, and then on the left side, I've kind of shown in previous episodes when I was having troubles with some other springs, this rather key pin that sits in this indent here and pops to either side of this high point. And when the machine is in automatic mode, it pulls down its own control buttons like addition and subtraction, but if it doesn't have enough English in this case, force, or I should say, I could get away with it because I could whack the button a little harder, a little more English, as they say, and a little bit of kinetic force would pop that over. Well, the machine, of course, is running at a constant speed, and it just tugs it down at a constant rate, and there's no like little jar to get it over the edge. So what I had to do is make a minor little adjustment. I think I probably loosened and tightened alternately back and forth these two screws, maybe a full turn or two. That was just enough to bias this little adjustment plate that adjusts the position of this arm that ultimately then moves this arm on the other side that moves this pin here. So hopefully that's all being followed, and that finally allowed it to work right, where the hitting the divide tab button would allow the machine to successfully pull down its own addition, subtraction, and carriage shift buttons, basically. Okay, so I thought I'd go over real quick how the machine actually activates its own keys sometimes in various automatic functions. When I first was sorting through the machine and getting some of the earliest functions going, the addition and the subtraction, I noticed that the addition didn't have nearly as crisp a click to it, and compared to, say, the subtraction, I have to give it a little English, as it were, and then it would, and hold it down, by the way, and then it would work. Subtraction, you could always push it, and it seemed to work very nicely. So, but as long as you did that, you could get by. When I've got as far as moving the carriage back and forth, you can, once you get past that one little hiccup of it stopping at the first digit shift, I guess I'm trying to figure out machine position. I guess they call it machine position. Removes one tab location over. If you get past that, it works fine. And it always worked fine whether you gave it some English or not, I guess. I should say a little more of a tap, a little more kinetic motion, I guess I could say. You could always go slowly and it would work. It seemed. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things that you work on this thing for months. You're not really sure what you did months ago. And this has been, a few hours every, few days, something like that. So anyways, when I finally got I was trying to get divide tab going, I noticed that even before I really realized that it had this stop right at the beginning of the first increment, it would never really work, and that was because the automatic mechanism doesn't pull this, wasn't pulling this key down firmly enough or quickly enough, and compared to when I could just whack the button, as it were. So that required, once again, I'll move this carriage out of the way. Once again, that's the reason I had to tweak those little screws that adjusted this position, this arm that goes ultimately to the addition and the carriage shifting button to get the arm clutch mechanism to move over just a little bit further. Otherwise, really early on when I was trying to figure it out, I could hit divide tab it would go through the initial motions, but it wouldn't quite move unless I nudged this arm over. And since I've gotten these screws turned, which was only about maybe a full turn or maybe two, loosening one, tightening another one, I can't remember which I did, then that allowed enough positive motion to allow this pin to go over, and I wouldn't have to nudge it with my finger ever so lightly. So, it's interesting how the machine itself, in effect, runs itself in certain functions, as it were. And I guess I'd have to look at it a little more carefully if they really need to actually move these keys, or whether it was just easier to have the keys then be pulled down. Probably the latter, because the rest of the mechanisms further downstream are what's really doing it, I guess. Okay, so anyhow, biggest problem right now is figuring out why it stops at only the first tab location, even though the tab is not set. And then it has the same problem as the key press. If I hold the press, the carriage motion guy tab, it has the same exact issue as the divide tab does, but only in that one direction, at least at these high speeds. That's interesting. I guess I never held that. I guess I never held the divide tab down. Did that behave differently? So I'll move it back over this way. And I'll hold it down. What did it do when I held it down? Didn't. Okay. It just. Well, that's kind of interesting. I held it down, and then it completed its functions. Maybe I can use that as a diagnostics. I'll hold it down. What does it do at the end here? Well, that might be helpful. Maybe I can use the hold down tab, because what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to take advantage of the fact that I have this motor control box here, and I can hit the go button and then immediately disable the motor and kind of differentiate what was my button pressing, moved various mechanisms, and then try and break down what was doing next. And that's what kind of the point behind the modes was. I was hoping to record how far things went and then be able to record that and use that as kind of a break point for testing something. And I may still be able to do that. Trying to do it manually is kind of proving a little challenging, but it was kind of the hope there. But okay, so I'll try maybe this. Rather than babble on the camera forever, I'll bang my head against this for a while, and maybe I'll have something more interesting to show you folks in a while. Anyhow, when you get to the more advanced functions of something like this guy that doesn't even have all the bells and whistles, it starts to kind of get to be quite a process to divide and conquer these little problems. Okay, so this is looking at the back side of the machine with the of course the trip mechanism for the tab stops and so forth. And looking at the machine going back and forth multiple times, I can never see anything that was, particularly different between, high speed, low speed directions, other than when you're going from left to right, and then you're wanting to then go from right to left, basically going from a clear to a ready for a division operation. You would always be interacting with a tab stop at that point, and my assumption was that that there was something else in the mechanism, because once it did its little flake out going past the first tab, or the next machine cycle decimal stop, however you want to call it, next point over, without the actual tab being there again, it would stop and not carry on. In other words, it didn't interact with a tab. But the commonality has been that when you bring it all the way to the end here, or at any of these tabs, when you do have them set, it is interacting with that tab initially. And I think what's actually going on is once this guy lifts up and is being moved over, I think it overshoots, it springs up too much, and that's what triggers it. Because this guy, he can rock back and forth, and he'll trigger a gear and another gear, and I guess I could maybe show that drawing too. And it's kind of interesting how that it flops up and down and left and right, and it does a number of different things as it engages against a couple different other mechanisms. But it's always, once the machine's starting, it always kind of deploys up, and then once it reaches something and it hooks that, it deploys back down. Well, it looks like when you are at your stop most position here, or any of these tabs, after going from left to right, it of course is underneath the tab, and then when you go to move it again, that's when it pops up. And I think what's actually happening is it's recoiling too much, and then it goes past one of these other gear features here, and I think that's what's actually triggering it. And it might be I don't know if a spring is too weak, or there's maybe too much oil or grease, and it just pops up too far, and it gets past one of these little latch features, and that causes it to stop prematurely, I think. At least that's my hope, so I'm going to try and explore that a bit. After messing with this, it might not misbehave for a moment. We'll see if it does. Okay, it did its pop up, and it did its stop prematurely. This is the lowest speed that my stepper system can go at, that I got it set to at the moment, by the way. So there, it stopped, and of course it stopped at with no tab location, so it shouldn't have stopped there. Now we'll run it, and it'll of course go all the way across without any troubles, because it always does. This part is actually remarkably reliable from here on. I don't think I've ever had it not work. And then when it approaches that permanent tab stop location, it gets lifted up a little bit. Actually, well, it isn't so much lift as it gets cocked or rotated. Okay, now it's set. Now I'll go back with the clear everything button, and it will be deployed up, and then it pops up. Now it's going to go back to this permanent carriage or tab stop location. Gets really more cocked over than anything. There we go. And then gets deployed back down again. Now what I'm going to do, I've done this a couple times before, is I'm just going to hold it down and keep it from springing up. It's lifted, but I haven't allowed it to spring up. And now it works. So I think there's a little too much recoil in it, and I'm kind of wondering if the recoil has something to do with maybe the viscosity of the oil here, grease, dirt, and because that might explain it, because otherwise you would think it would never work right. So I'll send it back. Now it gets pushed up, it pops up a little bit and recoils a little bit, and slides forward just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it down again and keep it from recoiling. And I'm not putting a lot of force, just a little bit, so it just doesn't have a chance to kind of bounce. I feel a little clunk there. Now I'm going to give it a little bit of a tweak forward like it would normally get. There we go. And so in effect, I tripped it like one of the tab stops would have. So if I had, I had this tab stop down, for instance, it would have behaved that way. So I'm going to clear that one. So the question is, it's down, and it's not so much that it's popping up, as I think there's a mechanism down here. When it's doing its release, it pops it up. There's a little mechanism down here that will raise and lower this guy, and that engages a gear and disengages it. I'll have to kind of show and explain that. I have to kind of remember how it worked either. I figured this one out kind of early on-ish. So the question is there a way to keep it from popping that little bit initially? Maybe I'll speed this up a little faster this way. So this is pretty much max speed. Okay, so I'm going to just let it malfunction here. It should malfunction again. There we go. So I'm going to send it back. Okay, now I'm going to hold it down lightly. Keep it from recoiling. There. That's interesting. So I think that's my problem there. I guess the question is, what's causing this little bit of a recoil? Is it the spring here? That does add a little force, and then there's a little momentum that would tend to drive the whole thing forward. But I don't think that's it. Is it actually this motion, or is it this? Because what triggers it is this motion for the okay, so let's see here. When it's moving, it's lifted up, and then it sees these tabs and is pushed out. So it's kind of. Well, I guess I'll move it over to. I'll move it over to the space. Oh, actually, wrong one. I'll move it over to this. Okay, so this time around, of course, it wants to run right. Okay. All right. Be that way. Every once in a while, it's happy and it'll actually do what it's supposed to do. Maybe this time it'll malfunction. There we go. Okay, there we go. So when it's normally moving forward, it's lifted. Right now, it doesn't want to lift because it's. Okay, there we go. It's lifted right around there. And as it approaches a tab stop, it drives across this diagonal surface, and it's sitting. Let's see here. So it's sitting around here. It hits that diagonal surface with this guy, and is lifted to this location, and that does that. So I think there's almost like 4 different positions, or maybe 3. There's this. There's this, and then there's maybe something down below. Maybe that's just I don't know. Anyhow, babble on here. So I think the question is it, maybe it's actually something down at the lower end here. There's a little part over here I could give a little drop of oil to. Maybe that would help. It's always one of those things where you discover some problem and you're not really sure what the solution is. The first thing to do is just put some oil on this thing. Maybe that'll solve its problems, right? Yeah, I already had that one deployed, so that doesn't count for anything. Okay, so let's try it now. Yeah, of course not. Oh well. And of course, it should run fine now. Yeah, it does. Okay. Because it didn't spring up at that point. Because it already was... it wasn't being pushed down or held down initially by that tab. It's interesting. There's all kinds of compound motions going on here, and it's hard to follow it all. Okay, so let's see here. So I'm going to try and move it and hold it in this way. Oop, hit my motor crank there. Watch these things flailing around on me. Try that again. Try and maintain some sort of steady position here. Okay, so that worked. So holding it in just a little bit seems to help. Question is, where is that? Where is that recoil coming from? Is it there? Is it there? I guess what I'll do is I will pause the camera, and I think what I'll do is I'll try and clean that, because here's a little bit of kind of a dark crud, you know, kind of underneath here from old oil and crud that was maybe still trapped under there. So I think I'll try and clean that. Maybe there's kind of an odd viscosity thing going on here, where it's finally you store up a bit of energy and it's kind of released from kind of a slimy old oil. And so I'll clean that up and see if just cleaning that and then putting in for some fresh oil works. So it'll take a little while. I'll be right back. Okay, so I think I may have solved the problem here. So what I've done is I've basically cleaned all of this area out with acetone, just what I happen to have available at the time. And so basically there's no lubrication in here at all. There's no oil with a lot of very fine dirt and crud that was buried underneath this guy. There's so no lubrication. And it works now, finally. It seems to anyway, so I have, of course, it's always one of those things, unless you do it a bunch of times, you might find otherwise, but it looks like, of course it would do that. Darn. But it has done it better than it has previously, so that's what I'll stick with here. So I'm going to see if, because I've gotten it to work a number of times now so far. Let's see if I can, see if statistically it's working better. No, okay, maybe not. It worked a number of times. Why now? Not working. Well, work on it some more. Okay, so I think I'm getting closer to solving this thing. I cleaned this guy all out, and I've done some oil and cleaning, and it does make it work a little bit more reliably. Still not enough. What I've concluded is this spring right here is a little too weak, and it's the guy that actually ultimately keeps this recoil problem down. So between the cleaning and the and then pulling on this spring a little bit, I think I'm solving my problem. So I could either try and shorten that spring, or I could maybe just pull it back like I have it here, and just give it that little bit more force, and keep this guy from having that little recoil. And then that solves the problem. So the spring is just a little weak, age or what have you. I mean, this thing's got unfathomable number of springs in it, and I've had so far relatively few spring issues as I've seen so far. Is absolutely amazing that they've held up so well. So I think a little bit of cleaning to kind of keep the viscosity, energy storage theory going there. So if I release that, now if I go back and I hold that spring just a little bit, let's go back here. It doesn't take much. So, and I think what I can do is I can loop a little piece of aluminum wire around this frame, because there's a loop on the other side that I can, or another part of the frame loop I think I can go through and not interfere with anything, and put a little bit of tension on this thing and shorten it by a little bit. And all it takes, I think, is probably about as little as that. Let's see if I can move it back there and see what it does. part of it is I am sitting sideways here, so I don't know if there's any thing going on here that might be aiding it. It doesn't seem like it ever does. I think it's purely in the control part, so I'll assume that it really is going to work again once I get this guy level, but not that much force. Yeah, it doesn't take much. I mean, I barely bow the spring over at all, and it seems to work quite happily then. So just about that much, that much more. Yes. So I think I can solve this problem with a little piece of like aluminum wire or something like that, and I bet I can solve this. And if it's something as simple as this and maybe some cleaning, what I did is acetone initially with a Q-tip, then tried to get in here and kind of wick that as much of that as a junk as I could out, and then some little tore up pieces of paper to kind of jam in there and slide around. From time to time, you can kind of get it into these gaps here and in here. And then ultimately I went with alcohol and then soaked the paper itself and got the worst of this little fine dark grit that was still kind of in there, along with old grease and oil. And that would prevent it from moving, and it would finally jar when it finally did release, and it would release and shock over. And then, like I say, the spring is really, it obviously is meant to prevent that very function and get it to return, and it doesn't quite overcome that recoil, and of it being popped out probably from underneath the tabs. So if I give that just a little tweak here, seems like I'm having to do little tweaks on these things, but maybe that's just the reality of these guys. So I'll baling wire this thing together and see if it works. Okay, well, it looks like my efforts at trying to solve this problem for several weeks, it seems like several hours every just few days, has finally been resolved. I've baling wired this spring. You can see it from here, and it works this arm here that works the tab stop stuff, and it provides just enough extra spring force. I had it slightly less taut than this before, and it worked. I've added a bit more for insurance sake, and I've lubricated and cleaned this and so forth, and now finally it seems to be working reliably. Now it goes all the way to the end without stopping the first go around. Finally. It's those little subtle things as you get more and more into the more complex stuff that just can kill you. So it wasn't all due to crud in here, but it was certainly contributing. And then the spring appears to be just a little too weak. And so there we are. It seems to be running very nicely. I'll set it upright in a moment here just to make sure that it's nothing to do with tilt. Hasn't ever been so far. I've been amazed how much tilt does not seem to come into play. You would think gravity would be a big thing on this guy, and I'm sure it's got to be at some point. But it's finally working. It would normally stop right at that point there, or at any point to the left if you spun it around, to the right I guess in this case, of whatever tab stop it happened to have been used. Because I could have stopped it there, and then the next time moved to the next side. Then it's when it would have its hiccup. So finally that problem is solved. Man, that one. And I discounted this guy being the problem early on because it wasn't interacting with any of these guys. So, well, it can't be interacting with it. What's the problem? Initially I kind of tugged on it, pulled on it. That, well, it has to be something else elsewhere. And so I've been having my eyeballs fall out, just looking at everything in slow motion, high speed, and everything else, trying to find where this problem is. Here it is at low speed, by the way, in case you're curious what happens at very low speeds. And it pops up, and it would have been that little recoil that would have shot it out just a little bit further. It would have caused it to engage. I'll have to see if I can dig up the drawings that kind of explain how this guy works. At one point I kind of understood it. And then it engages that guy and lifts it, does this thing there, and pops it down. Okay, and now we'll send her back. I guess I could have done that at high speed. Oh well. I guess while it's trudging along back to the other side, one thing I can't help but notice is this little part here that's kind of acting as a guide. It's the same part. They just simply took this little cap that holds these rods in place and just used that cap over here as kind of a little guide. So it's kind of a fun little thing. I'm absolutely certain that part is the same guy as this guy, and they're just reusing it for a different function here. Why not, you know? That's all you needed it for. Okay, so high speed again. And of course, occasionally I'm driving the stepper motor as fast as it can go, and you can overdrive it and it starts losing steps, which is what happened there. And it takes a little more power to run those sides. Nothing to do with any of this trouble, just the motor's unhappy. I might actually build this drive motor up a little bit further, because looking at some YouTube videos, I noticed that this machine is capable of even higher speeds. I've seen a video on the CAA10, which is basically this guy just with all the bits. This is the stripped down version of that, and then the N6, and boy, they really move. And I've been basing the RPM of this motor on the MA series and the something other series that's, you know, quite a few generations earlier, and they were saying about shy of 400 RPM, so I based it off of that. So that's why I was kind of confused as to why this machine seemed to be going a lot slower than I was expecting. So I may build this motor up a little bit further, and then then I can run the motor itself at a lower speed, but I'll have plenty of torque. So at least that's a thought in the future. At the moment, it works fine. Yeah, I just maybe can't run it quite as fast as I would like. See, am I already on the end? I guess I'm already on the end. Okay, all right. So I was trying to do carriage return there. Okay, so far it looks like I'm solved. So I guess I'll put this thing more upright and run it a few more times and just make certain gravity isn't doing something, and I'll call it good. Okay, so the tab control arm that was causing me so much trouble, so I needed to put a little more spring force into. I put this little piece of baling wire, which you can't see very well from here. That arm, unfortunately, does not have really very good explanation as to how it works. There's like 3 different sections that kind of cover a little sprinkling of it. And nothing seems to go really full on about the whole thing. The closest thing is that they talk about the tab stops, and then they talk about some adjustment for the tab stop for that little plunger, that how it interacts with that, and that's about it. That's kind of a direct talk. And then there's some other interaction talk about that arm and how it lifts, and then you know, I think there's a little bit more in another page here. But unfortunately, how they kind of sprinkle it out between different sections, it's actually kind of hard to follow. And that kind of also added to, you know, the difficulty of kind of diagnosing this. So unfortunately, I wish there was a section where it really went into a little bit more detail how it worked. Maybe I'll do another video sometime when I get to the point where I'm kind of like trying to trace out everything and everything's running nicely, and I can kind of methodically go over what does what in a nice linear fashion. But at the moment, at least, it's finally running, so I'm happy with that for the moment. Okay, so it looks like just pulling on that spring a little bit more to eliminate the recoil on that little control mechanism that interacts with the tab stops, and maybe cleaning it up a little bit, getting some of the old oil, dirt, and crud that was in there and cleaning that, and maybe putting a little more oil in might help a little bit, but I think it's mostly just the spring. So it looks like my divide tab works finally. It goes all the way across without stopping at the first digit, or what have you, and it moves back and forth very nicely now. So yay, finally. And I was questioning early on whether it was normal for it to do this reverse back and forth motion, and it was doing something on the counter, cycle counter here. You can see it does one little motion and goes back, and I'm pretty sure that's actually normal, because what it does, if I understand divide tab, is you put in your first number that you're going to do your division by, say, you know, 100, and you hit divide tab, there's no numbers in there until it gets to the tab point. It puts that number in, and when it puts that number in, it winds up doing a machine cycle in order to get that entered in there, and your answer is actually going to be up here on the machine cycle counter. It's how many chunks, say 100, say 10 went into 100, it'll be like 10 times, right? So you should have a 10 up here. So if you put that number in, that would have been one machine cycle, and that's obviously your answer is off by one. So it has to flush that result out. So it has to empty that cycle counter up there, if indeed I'm interpreting this right, and I think that's correct. So anyhows, I wish I could at this point actually do a division problem, but I know it will be a disaster at this point, so I can't do that. So I guess that's it basically. If I put in 9 nines, for instance, and hit divide tab, it'll go over, in this case, all the way to the end, because I don't have any tabs set in there. It'll put in the 9 and it clears out that cycle counter that it had accumulated in order to get the 9 nines in there. So then we're ready to go. Then I'd type in my other number, I don't know, whatever number that would have been, and I'd hit divide, which I can't do right now because I know the world will come to an end for this machine at this point, as it always has the few times I've tried to actually work with divide. So that'll be undoubtedly the next episode. So this took a lot more than I would have thought. I had hoped to just simply do a ta-da, I have this thing going here, and I could just show that everything else is running fine, which up to that point it was, until I finally was able to work with divide tab instead of having to hand crank this stuff. And once you have this motorized, you start seeing other little details like this. So basically, I guess the end synopsis is I had to adjust a couple of screws that biased which direction these guys will operate their mechanism that then ultimately goes to the clutch arm, because this guy wouldn't pull down quite as firmly. And then I had to basically just nudge a spring and do some cleaning, and that took quite a few hours of work. What can I say? These machines, there's a lot going on in them, and I guess the humbling reality is the vast majority of the machine works perfectly fine, even after I got it and have done all I've done to it. If say only a few percent of the bits and pieces were wrong, it's fixable. Anything past that, I just don't know. I don't know how anyone can do this stuff. It's just crazy. So the reality is the vast majority of the machine works fine even without my fixing it. So if it was anything significantly more than that, I don't know how you'd fix it. I've only been really dealing with the periphery edge troubles on this guy. So it's just amazing how bogglingly complicated these things are, and how many things there are to go wrong on it, and how much of it is in fact actually working just fine. So anyhows, I think that's it. I'll start working next on divide next, and I guess that's it for this episode from the Id of Ed. And I'm getting close. Addition, subtraction, upper, lower, clear, this clear, repeat, simplistic multiplication that isn't really as automatic as I'd hoped, all work. I think I'm really basically down to just divide. And then I guess I got a fully functioning, budget-ish, highly automatic mechanical calculator from the, I'm guessing this is the late or early 50s, late 50s. I still ought to try and nail down when this was actually made. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed it. It's a long-winded episode for what actually turned out to be a relatively few problems, but they're subtle and they're hard to detect at this point. So thanks for watching.